verse 33, and I'm going to jump to verse 38, we see that there are signs. There are massive signs that take place as Jesus is there upon the cross. Verse 33 gives one sign. It says this, "And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour." And then I'm going to jump to verse 38. After Jesus gives up his spirit and breathes his last, verse 38 tells of the second sign that happens, and it says that the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. You know, there's these events that take place in a sense that God the Father wants to make sure that everyone in Jerusalem knows that something is going down. Something very important is going down. And we considered even, Pontius Pilate, we considered just the Romans, and, what would get their attention would be something just cosmic. Something where it just is dark at midday. And then we considered the trials at the hands of the Jewish leaders. And what would get their attention would be the innermost part of their temple being just ripped apart. There's this torn veil. And that's really, really significant. As we studied through the book of Exodus a couple years ago, this veil is described in the book of Exodus, and that's what separates a place in the temple or tabernacle called the Holy of Holies from the holy place, and it's where the presence of God would be manifested. And now during this event, it's torn, supernaturally torn, from top to bottom, as if to say that because of what happened on that mountain, the presence of God is available to all. Because of what happened on Calvary, there's no more need for blood to be put here for the covering or forgiveness of sins. Because of what happened on that cross outside of Jerusalem, all are welcome. And it's just a visible, demonstrable, seen event that takes place physically to show what happened there spiritually. And now we come to verse 34 to verse 37, and we see the words that Jesus says from the cross. Mark, of course, is always the most succinct and brief. He has one saying that Jesus said. And I'd be tempted to talk about the other 6, but I think that's what we're going to look at on Wednesday night. But it's one thing that we're going to consider, and it's worthy of our meditation. It's 34 to 37, the words that he says. It says, "At the 9th hour," so after 3 hours of darkness, perhaps 3 hours in silence, as Jesus just labors to breathe and survive, it says, "At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah comes to take him down." And then Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. Jesus says this phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And it is immediately misunderstood. Totally misunderstood by the people who heard it right away, and perhaps throughout the decades, or the centuries, the millennia since then, people have misunderstood it. You see, the word for God, Eloi, it sounds like Elijah. And so someone just makes this misunderstanding and thinks, oh, he's calling on the Old Testament saints to deliver him or something like that. Totally not what he's saying at all. Some people would look at this and think, oh, this is the man Jesus who had messianic delusions. He thought that God would rescue him, but God didn't, and he died upon the cross, disappointed, lonely. And here we see this is his cry of defeat, as he realizes maybe he wasn't the Savior after all. Definitely not what he was saying. In a way that no one has meant it and no one has truly expressed it since, Jesus was forsaken upon the cross. He didn't just feel forsaken, but he was forsaken. Of course, he's quoting Psalm 22, which was written by David about 1,000 years earlier than that. And David at that moment felt forsaken by God. And here, Jesus can tell that his intimacy, his lifelong or eternity-long communion and loving relationship with the Father was interrupted. What causes this interruption of the fellowship between God the Son and God the Father? Well, it's because that at that moment that Jesus became sin and bore the sin of humanity. To quote a noted theologian, he says, "It was as if God had taken a giant bucket and scooped up all the sins of his people, all the jealousy and the anger and the lying, all of the rebellion and the stealing and the incest, all the hypocrisy and the envy and the swearing, and dumped them all out on Jesus Christ." As the prophet Isaiah says, that the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And God averts his eyes from that sin. He had to turn his back. And more so, being a holy God, he had to condemn and curse and damn that sin. We think about what God thinks about sin and God's hatred and displeasure for sin. Psalm 7:11 says that God hates sin. God hates iniquity, that he's angry at it constantly. And we could think of various pictures in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that would show us, I guess, God's displeasure and God's wrath against sin. But ultimately, we need to look at Jesus rejected on the cross and think, well, that's how much he hates sin. We need to hear his cry as he says that he is forsaken upon the cross and think, well, that's how much God hates sin. There's a sense in which that should alarm us. That should cause us to listen up and think, God hates sin that much that he would forsake his Son for those moments because of sin? Alarming. But we realize that what's taking place is that he exchanges our sin for his righteousness that he extends to us. Not because he overlooks our sin. Not because he says, sure, it'll be grand. Not because he says everything's okay, we all make mistakes, but he says, it's a giant problem, but I fixed it. I paid for it. I'm not going to skip over it, but it's paid for. And so because of that, your sin is taken from you because it was placed upon someone else.